Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us. My name's Elizabeth Draper, and I'm Deputy Chair of the English Association, and I'm very pleased to be hosting this session. The English Association is a learned society and subject association which was founded in 1906 to promote, support, and celebrate the discipline of English studies. We cover all stages of education from primary and early years through to secondary and further education, to higher education and beyond. We also cover all parts of the discipline across language, linguistics, literature, and creative writing. Events like this one are made possible by the fantastic contribution of our volunteer speakers, so thank you to tonight's speakers who will be introducing themselves shortly. Our members make it possible to keep these events free and open to all by paying their membership fees. If you would like to contribute to the national conversation about English and help support our discipline, please consider joining us. It costs around £1 per week to support our events and campaigning work for a whole year, and you'll get access to a range of member benefits, including online access to all our journals. Now it's my pleasure to hand over to tonight's speakers for our discussion on English and boys, why are young men turning away from our subject? Chaired by Simon Kovesi, who's Professor of English and Scottish Literature, Head of the School of Critical Studies at the University of Glasgow. Over to you, Simon. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And good evening or good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've got a Pimm's or something nice to see you through this. I'm boiling hot down it. But thank you so much for joining us. We've got nearly 50 people, which is fantastic and way beyond what we expected. That's brilliant. As Elizabeth said, I'm Simon, and I work on mostly working class literature, and I'm head of the School of English. Before starting at Glasgow a few years ago, I was head of English at Oxford Brookes, so I've taught and studied both in England and in Scotland. And I was an undergraduate at Glasgow. It's always been a subject that has been predominantly, classrooms full of women. And at various points in my life, I've really enjoyed that. And it's not, sometimes it's a bit of a problem when you're a lecturer and you're running a seminar and you're talking about gender and, whatever it might be, tests, and everyone in the room is a woman, and you're the only bloke. I'm sorry to be so binary about it, by the way, but that's the language of kind of education at the moment. It's boys and girls and all that. And those are the genders that are monitored. But it's become apparent in recent years as we've watched our subject over the, it's actually more like 15 years now, where I've been as a head of school at Brookes and at Glasgow looking at the contraction of the subject and variously being concerned about it and trying to respond to it locally, and also trying to have conversations more broadly with colleagues in across the sector and in all kinds of places. The English is in decline. The thing that really shocked me was when I saw a response to UCAS trends about 4 years ago, where the decline was continuing in English, which was by that time no surprise, but the decline among boys, especially and specifically in the A-level system, was really sharp. And it looked like if it carried on, there'd be next to no boys, and certainly no state-educated boys studying English in 10, 15 years' time. And it's been a worry. Mostly the responses to it from colleagues, very broadly speaking, at conferences, in the pub, whatever, and at work, have been quite dismissive, actually, or have been anecdotal, or have been, to moan, as I do, about my teenage boys, and their screen time and, their lack of reading, lack of interest in reading, or just lack of time reading. But what I wasn't getting was a sense of people who are in classrooms, from even before 11, but from 11 years old onwards, other than the kind of general gripes about GCSE and kind of pressures in A-level and all that sort of stuff, and then broader conversations about vocationality and utility, and then quite panicky conversations about masculinity in general and the kind of Andrew Tate crap and all those kinds of things. What I wasn't getting a sense of was what boys are thinking and why are they not reading, and what's going on. I just couldn't get, it was kind of quite a lot of buzzy wasps really of problems, and nothing seemed to be tangible or based on real data. So through various conversations with colleagues in the English Association elsewhere, and then eventually with Becky and with Jenny Richards, we decided to do this special issue of the English Association newsletter, which was brilliant for me because I know nothing about this subject, but I was able with Becky to gather these wonderful people, some of whom are here tonight to speak to you, who have been working this issue both in classrooms and more broadly in terms of policy and in terms of looking at trends and data and so on. And so what we're going to do is have those, I think we've got 5 people here tonight to talk about it. I'm just going to tie off an issue which has been a bit pressing since I moved back to Scotland, is that the English Association and various other bodies have forgotten sometimes, it seems, that the school system in Scotland is really different. We don't do GCSEs, don't do A-levels, we do Nat 5s and Highers. The higher system is only 1 year, so you only do 1 year post-16. Anyway, and what I wanted to do and what I'd never seen was a trend that was about the Scottish secondary and inter-university system in particular. And what's really interesting, it doesn't necessarily give us causality necessarily, but nevertheless, approximately 48% of people who do higher English in Scotland, so that's post-16 qualification, which only lasts for 1 year, 48% of the people doing it are boys. So we don't see the same drop-off that we do in A-level in the rest of the UK, in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And that's really interesting. Now, it's also the case that a lot of schools, well, they don't make English compulsory because you do 5 Highers in Scotland. Sorry if you all know this already, but a lot of people don't in England. So and I had to find this out as well when I moved back to Scotland. But a lot of schools make it semi-compulsory, or, they kind of expect a lot of higher students who are doing 5 subjects to stick English in there. So there might be a slightly artificial maintenance of those numbers beyond 16. But nevertheless, so the other trend that's apparent in Scotland is that although higher education does face the same financial problems that the rest of the sector is currently on fire over, there's no doubt about that. The funding model in Scotland is just as bad as it is in the rest of the UK. In fact, in some ways it's worse. But anyway, I won't go into that. What's interesting is the actual number of applications and enrolments in Scotland to English programmes and English studies programmes, very broadly conceived, English language, English literature, creative writing and so on. It's not in decline in Scotland in the way it is in the rest of the UK. So that's also really interesting. So there is a different kind of set up in Scotland, and it is making the trends around us for our subject quite different. So I thought I'd tie that off first, as I do in my editorial in the newsletter, so that the rest of this conversation can really be focused on the rest of the UK, on GCSE and A-level and so on. So that's it from me, really. I'm going to hand over now. We're going to go through our speakers in a rough order of kind of going from the kind of global kind of data picture to more specific and classroom-based activities and interests. So I'm going to pass over now to Rachel Roberts, who's going to introduce herself. Rachel.
Hello, everyone. Yes, well, thank you for coming on the extraordinarily hot afternoon that we've got this evening. I think the key thing from the investigations that I've done, this is partly based on a research project I ran a couple of years ago where I interviewed 67 year 11 and year 12 students about their choices around A-level. And then I've subsequently been involved in a wider survey where we had 500 respondents of students who were current A-level students of English. So I had quite an interesting sort of background in terms of where I was drawing some ideas from as to what the problem with boys and them not taking up English in the way that we might like. We know that there's been a problem with boys and English uptake for a long time. This is not a new phenomena. However, I think it has clearly declined even further, and I think that's probably what's prompted some of the conversations that we're now having. So last year's entries for A-level, of the thousands of entries for all of the English A-level courses, only 23% of those were made up by male students, and I think that says something quite starkly in the difference between the choices that girls make for A-level subjects compared to their male counterparts. So we know that this is a problem. I think for the work that I've done, the research that I've done, it seems to really come down to value. and I mean this in kind of two sort of linked ways. The dominance of STEM and the value that's put on STEM subjects generally, and how that is read in a negatively gendered way, and that STEM subjects and those kinds of subjects being sort of aligned with stereotypical and masculine way of looking at the world, and that being linked to sort of future financial career remuneration. You're much more likely to have a well-paid job if you study physics compared to if you study English or art or something like that. So there are these kind of two things that seem to be really linked in some of the research that I did. There's also existing research that found that boys were more likely to rank subjects of STEM subjects as ones that they found to be more enjoyable, they were better at, and that they had this belief that it would be more likely to lead to a future career and a higher paid job. Whereas some other research suggests that boys tend to have a much stronger motivation towards personal financial gain, whereas girls express stronger motivation towards something, an occupation that will be positively contributing towards society. Those again, those tend to be kind of quite broad assumptions made, but this is rooted in some empirical data that supports that notion. So what I felt was that there's a kind of a double negative of lack of value in English as a subject. It lacks for boys to an extent. It lacks both intrinsic and extrinsic value in terms of what it might lead to, and that is linked to it being seen in a negative light in terms of being gendered. One of the participants in one of my studies, this was a female student, year 12 student, said, so, and what was particularly interesting, that particular study, I wasn't focusing on gender as being part of the reason why that might influence children's choices for A-level, but it came out of the data quite strongly that this was a factor, and I hadn't noticed it until it came out of the data itself. But she said, when I picture an English classroom, I picture girls, and it's considered girly. I know that it might come from a place of internalized misogyny. So it wasn't that they lacked recognition that there was a kind of almost a sort of negative stereotype that they recognise then playing out into kind of reality. I don't really know many boys who are into reading or like writing, she said, and people view English as a female subject and therefore don't take it. So I think there is a pervasive culture of negativity around English as a subject, both in terms of sort of putting it against STEM as to its detriment in terms of sort of future careers, its utility, but also that being linked to, in a negative way, being feminized and therefore of less value in and of itself. So I think those are my kind of big takeaways, I think, from the research that I've done.
Thank you, Rachel. I forgot to set it up. Actually, what we're going to do is look at the problems first. So we're going to go through our speakers first, looking at all the problems. Rachel's given us a big overview there, which is fantastic, including, which is something that often gets ignored, the voices of actual people in classrooms, which I know we're going to hear from others on this panel as well today. So we're going to look at the problems first, go through the speakers, zero in on the problems, and then we're going to go back through the speakers and look at solutions, and then we'll come back to all the questions that are coming in the chat at the end. But thank you so much. Keep the questions coming, and we'll try and cover them all. Thank you so much, Rachel, for that overview. I'm going to go to Jo next. Jo, please introduce yourself, and off you go.
Hiya. So hi everyone. So my name's Jo, and I am Deputy Dean for Education within the Faculty of Arts, Humanities, Education and Social Sciences at Anglia Ruskin University. So South East England. We've got campuses in Cambridge and Chelmsford and Peterborough and London, a lesser known London. But I didn't always start in higher education. So my background has been very broad across education. So I started off as a primary school teacher, as a subject leader in English, then moved into secondary education teaching, then moved into teaching in further education, teaching GCSE resits, which I can see Phil's asking about in the chat. So teaching those students who need to keep retaking their English exam, also teaching some A-level and access English courses at the same time. And then I moved into higher education. So my provocation for wanting to be part of all of this is that experience of teaching and what happens to the subject of English across the age ranges. And I found it very interesting from a personal perspective of how I see the restrictions that fall on you as a teacher, that as you go up the levels until you reach higher education where it starts to become more freely, but as you go up the age ranges, it can feel quite restrictive in how you need to teach because you are governed by qualifications and exams. So for me, what happens and what I've seen is that boys become less interested the more restrictive those teaching and learning approaches become, and the more restrictive the curriculum feels, married with pressures of qualifications and exams, particularly at that GCSE level. So if we want boys to take up the subject later on, we need to stop damaging the subject when they're in secondary education, GCSE, because that systemic focus on standardized qualifications, mandated tests, it just suffocates the creativity, it suffocates the story and the joy of expression, which we all need, but particularly boys need. And I think the narrowing of the curriculum disproportionately impacts boys because it really affects their space to explore and their choice in those stories. And from my experience, boys really enjoy stories. It's not that they don't enjoy the stories, it's that they can't enjoy the restricted curriculum, the way we teach language, and the fact that we have such a focus on it and we don't teach that creativity through literature and through that autonomous choice. That is what has increasingly turned them away and off of the subject completely, because they know that down the line, okay, I've got to retake my GCSE English language, because obviously that's where the value is. As Rachel's saying, she's talking about the value. The employers put the value on the language and not the literature, not the stories, and not all of that. And we're telling them this. So we can't therefore then be surprised if they're not loving our language and our subject at the heart of what they do. So for me, it's that disproportionate effect that it has on boys, that restrictive curriculum and that restriction in teaching and learning. I think that for me is the big problem. But I agree and build on Rachel's point about that value aspect as well.
That's really interesting, Jo. Thank you so much. We'll come back to you for solutions in a few minutes. Thank you so much. And by the way, I forgot to get Rachel to introduce herself. We're going to do that when we come back to her. And I apologise for that. So thanks, Jo. Brilliant. Next on our list is Helen. Can you introduce yourself, please? And then off you go. And feel free to share your slides.
Hello, I'm Helen Thomson, and I'm currently a PhD student at the University of York. And my study is on the factors affecting the uptake of A-level English by boys. So it is exactly this area. Prior to returning to university, I was a secondary school English teacher for 22 years. The first 5 years were in a boys' school. The last 5 years were head of English in a boys' school. And in the bit in the middle, I actually had 6 years working overseas in Australia, where English is mandatory until the end. And it's much more similar system to the one in Scotland. What I was hoping to do today is share some of the findings which are coming out of my PhD. I am right in the middle of doing the work on it, so these may change, but my perception is actually that we're in the middle of a perfect storm. It's a combination of factors working together. So here are the 6 main strands that have emerged from my research so far. I should explain, my research is surveys and focus groups with Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5 boys studying English, and it's based in Yorkshire because I feel regionality is important as well. So they're not enjoying pre-A-level English, exactly the stuff that Jo was saying, the value, STEM, careers, aspiration, that element that Rachel was mentioning. And a couple of other points, the difficulty of the skills required by English and also gender. So if I quickly go through these, they're not enjoying pre-level English. This is the stuff that's been coming out from teachers with things like the EMC research. And I mean, I just pick out the one at the end, repetitive and boring. It feels like my soul is draining from my body. It really made me laugh when I was looking at the survey, but what's been interesting is how many kids who are clearly articulate and interested, and somebody who's got an ear for metaphor, that's their experience of it. Focus group that I did on Monday with boys doing A-level, and they were talking about death by Peel from the very beginning of year 7, and it all being about learning a particular process. Another thing about the difficulties of skills required by English, obviously there's a lot of research into boys and reading and so on, but one of the strands that's been coming out that's been quite interesting about their interaction with reading, and not just the I'd rather play on my phone, I find it boring, but actually about what's happening to their brain function. And I thought this comment was fascinating. When reading, your brain sort of just doesn't understand because the stimulation of having 5 things going on at once just isn't there. And we've got a generation of young men growing up who literally the actual process of trying to read is very neurologically complicated for them. And also where they're being raised in an era of instant gratification and short attention span, which is going to mean subject where you're having it, you need to focus on something for up to 45 minutes to write a response. When you think about how long it takes to write an essay, and in particular in an exam situation, writing it in that very linear way, when you're used to dealing with things in 5-minute, 3-minute, 30-second chunks, and to be able to move things around if you want. The gender in English, this is an element of it. I mean, in the, I think, 7 focus groups I've done so far, one of the questions I have is about what's your perception of the ideal English student. All but one of them, they've said it was a girl. The only one where they said it wasn't a girl, it was a Key Stage 4 group of boys who were taught in a diamond structure. So they were taught in single sex classes for Key Stage 4. And they were quite comfortable with the idea that, oh yeah, boys could be great at English, but every other focus group, it's girls. The quotation at the top, I think, is very challenging. I think some boys just writing about that, and they were talking about writing about patriarchy all the time, could get a bit like, all right, written loads about men oppressing women. When am I going to get to kind of write something good about my own gender? I feel like maybe boys get pushed to the side. If anyone, I'm sure some of us have read the Lost Boys report that came from the Centre of Social Justice, and they quite early on statistic about percentage of young men saying feminism has gone too far, and a sense of grievance and anger. That particular participant was doing A-level English. She was an articulate and quite thoughtful 18-year-old, but clearly a sense of strong underlying grievance. And that when we have a curriculum which has a lot of traditional texts, issues like patriarchy are going to emerge, but also how we approach them and what we see as being boy texts. So the idea of the boy texts that are often done, Macbeth, Lord of the Flies, war poetry, Jekyll and Hyde, and what you're getting again and again is toxic male, toxic male, toxic male. And then onto the STEM issues. Rachel's already talked about that so very articulately, but that obviously was coming out as a really clear factor. Careers and aspiration. This has been the single biggest thing I think probably that's come through, is when I'm asking them what's affecting your choices. It's about where am I going to go next. Quotations, I couldn't even tell you what a career path is you could go into with English. No sense of where it's going to take you, and that's partly I think because of values, which again obviously Rachel's talked about. I will explain why Elon Musk is on there at the moment, but this quotation that English is focused more on the past and what we've done before rather than the future and how we can improve ourselves. I think that's coming from the GCSE curriculum they're doing, and the absolute focus on context, which is frustrating them. I'll never need any of the creative writing we learn in school, so the sense that it's irrelevant. The most terrifying statistic for me, I think, is this has come from my surveys, which is a question about whether they would have taken the subject at GCSE if it hadn't been mandatory. only 23, this is based on 249 responses, only 23.3% would have agreed that they would have taken language, and only 19.3 agreed that they would have taken literature, and that's at GCSE. And I think it is that the values that we would say that it is a subject that encourages rigorous analysis of language, nuanced thinking, and empathy. Obviously, in an environment where you've got someone like Musk saying that empathy is the greatest weakness of the Western world, I mean, we say he's a moron, but people are still, that's being highly publicized. What we are selling as the value of English is incredibly countercultural, and in some cases just something that the students aren't even aware of. So those are some of the findings.
That was brilliant, Helen. Yeah, and it exactly tallies with a lot of my experience as being a parent and listening to my boys talk about what the experience of doing English is like, which I could talk about, but maybe that's for another time. Thank you so much. That was really fantastic. We go now to Audrey, if that's okay. Audrey, could you introduce yourself and then off you go? Thank you.
Okay. Hello, so my name's Audrey Wood. I lead the English PGCE at the University of Bedfordshire, which is in the same sort of area as Joe, just sort of, in the sort of southeast central area near Cambridge. And prior to that, I was an English teacher, head of English, always in secondary school, so that's been my kind of background. And I'm talking to you from the perspective of going into schools and observing what happens in schools, watching lots of my new English teachers, seeing what their practice is like in school. So they've heard it all from me in the university about how I want them to be creative and engaging and brave and really get the students to love the subject. And then I go and see them in the classroom, and I see not so much death by peel, like Helen said, but it's now death by visualizer. That's the latest bit of technology that's killing our subject. I found that at Key Stage 3, there is still a lot of enjoyment. Boys and girls enjoy the creative pedagogy, the social constructivist pedagogy, the opportunities for discussion and to express their opinion, unless they're in a booklet school. And if it's a booklet school, there's lots of teacher modelling, annotating the extract, and we do, I do, we do, you do, and it is very constrained. But that gets worse when we get to Key Stage 4, when, as my colleagues are saying, the curriculum becomes much more narrow, and students, especially boys, are focusing on texts where there is toxic masculinity throughout. So again, as Helen said, the patriarchy in every single text that they study, Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, Macbeth, you name it, there is never a positive male role model. The Burlings, I can't think of a positive male role model. One of the more recent texts, My Name is Leon, you could argue is a bit more culturally relevant. And the students do enjoy that, and I think the boys are maybe a bit more engaged with that. But there needs really to be a lot more culturally relevant text for the boys. So I think for me, the real main problem is the lack of empathy for the characters. Students don't care about those characters. Just a little personal anecdote. I tried to write a book once, and the feedback I got from the editor was, nobody cares about this character. And I thought, okay, thank you, I'll go away and rewrite it, which I haven't done. But it made me reflect, and I thought, well, if our pupils don't care about the characters, if they're not interested, they're not going to be engaged. So that's my 2 pence for you.
That was brilliant. I've got a couple of questions, Audrey, just because I'm completely ignorant of some of the terminology you use. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies.
The higher education silo. What's what is, right, don't laugh at me, everyone, by the way, but what is visualizer? What does that mean?
Oh, so it's a piece of technology. It's like a
Right.
camera that you have on your
Okay.
desk,
Yeah.
and you can use that to, it's kind of like a video of the piece of paper, the work or the pupil's
Oh
work
yeah,
that
and
you're
it puts it
looking
on the
at,
screen behind
and
you.
puts it onto the screen.
Oh,
That's
I've got
it.
one of that. I've used those. Okay, so
Oh,
I
there
didn't
you
know it's
are.
called a
So yeah,
visualizer, right?
live
Why-
annotation. Yeah.
Okay, so why is that the death of our subject? Because people just use it all the time, or
We use it all the time. It's constant. Right, we're looking at this extract.
yeah.
Now I'm going to highlight this quotation and I'm going to explain why I've highlighted, and I'm going to model how to annotate it. And then in a good lesson, it'll be, can I have some suggestions of what I might annotate next? And then now, children, you annotate the rest of it. So it's completely, it's annotating extracts. It's without that kind of overview of the whole text. You know, it just becomes a really skills-based exercise, and it's exam prep, really.
Yeah, gotcha. I understand. So it's more the technology itself is being used in a really flat way, repetitively.
Yes,
Okay, I got it. I got it right. Okay, so I'm not quite as technology behind the secondary school sector as I thought I was, because I've used them, but not like that actually. Weirdly enough. So, and also, and forgive me again, everyone. What is a booklet school?
Oh, okay. So this might only be in our area.
Okay.
What's happened is teachers have created booklets, like sequences of learning with booklets, where they have all the extracts in the booklet. And part of that is to do with not having money to buy whole texts.
Yeah.
And part of that is because teachers themselves sometimes write extracts that they want the students to study. And it means that it also means that a non-specialist teacher can pick up that booklet and teach the lesson. So, okay, go to page 16. We're going to read this extract, we're going to annotate it, and now you're going to answer these questions. So it's like, do you remember the worst cover lessons that you used to have back in the day when you'd be given the exercise book? It was usually, apologies to any scientists, but it was usually a science lesson. You'd be given the science textbook and you'd work through the exercises in the science book. And that, I feel, a lot of English lessons have become reduced to that way of teaching.
Really interesting. So again, it's kind of almost like the technology that's flattening things. It's kind of,
yeah, because of the lack of subject specialists, the idea of these booklets is that if you're not a subject specialist, you can pick it up and teach the lesson.
Anyone can teach English, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Audrey, thank you so much for explaining to me. I'm sorry for my ignorance, but that was really interesting.
That's okay.
Fascinating. And our final speaker on the roster is Emma. Emma, can you introduce yourself and then off you go? Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Hi, everyone. My name's Emma Berry-Dinnage, and I am an English teacher and reading lead at a school in Staffordshire. I think sometimes it's the problem with going last. I feel like everybody has made some absolutely incredible points. And as a classroom practitioner who is living through it at the moment, I think the idea of the restrictive curriculum really has stood out. I mean, lots of things. I'll be taking this back to my head of department, I think, tomorrow. I'm desperate for him to watch it. But I think the restrictive curriculum is really, really difficult for our boys in particular. And it's interesting because in English, when we consider what English is, it's the subject of communication. We're teaching people how to communicate ultimately. And if they can't do it in English, then they're going to struggle in any subject. I think sometimes that isn't clear enough. I think sometimes it's very much, I think as somebody made the point earlier on, you know, it's very much made a point that we have to, you know, we have to teach a certain set of English skills. You have to know the skill, you have to analyse it a certain way in order to pass your GCSEs. And we are missing actually like the creativity and the expression of English. I'm going to focus a little bit on reading because my article was about our reading intervention that we did for a group of boys from year 9 into year 10, which was really successful. I think sometimes when we look at reading for pleasure, Key Stage 3, that's a big deal at the moment. Lots of people are, well, Ofsted, I know we were Ofsted in January, and one of the first things they wanted to look at was our reading curriculum and how we approach reading as a whole school agenda. I think we front load a lot of 19th century text, even from year 7, and we don't focus on the reading for pleasure bit. It is about teaching what 19th century texts look like, you know, how you would approach a word, a meaning, what the writer may have been thinking at the time, even when we are supposed to be just having that solid time for reading. And then obviously when they get to year 10 and 11, they lose that completely because you're so GCSE focused. And we have such little time to teach that curriculum as well. So it's very hard on teachers in order to kind of make sure that they've taught everything they possibly can. So I think looking at what you're actually choosing for your reading for pleasure and how you're approaching that. I recently did quite a lot around World Book Day and the Read Your Way, which I think is a really important message for our students. We serve quite a deprived area, so our students don't value education massively. They certainly don't have a lot of books at home to hand. And as I said in my article, we chose for our reading intervention session the book Orange Boy by Patrice Lawrence, with the understanding that these boys really just wanted to see something that they could relate to. So I think the problem, if we were going to narrow it down, which I don't think we really can, I think everyone's made really, really valid points. I think the problem with reading and with how we approach reading for boys is that we're not creating those opportunities for boys to see enough of themselves in text and relatable situations. So one of the reasons I think our intervention was so successful in the beginning was because we chose something that was challenging, that was potentially going to open up ideas for some of our boys, but also to show them that people like them also existed and they could exist in stories as well. The art of storytelling and how we let children enjoy books needs to be revisited, I think. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much. I'm just going to ask our kind of organiser for this is Elizabeth Draper. Elizabeth, can we run over time, or do we have to stick to 5:30 because we've only got like 7 minutes left?
Okay, I'm afraid I've got instructions to finish at 5:30.
That's fine. That's fine.
I'm not sure if the webinar will carry on after that.
That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. No, I'm glad I asked. That's okay. And it's probably my fault that we're running out of time, but also it's been fantastic responses. Thank you so much. I don't know if anyone wants to come back at me with solutions. Are there any that you can see that are pragmatic, quite fairly easy to do from the panelists? I mean, Rachel, do you want to go first?
I'm very happy to. I think we need a culture change in school where we have kind of positive role models of people who do English, who study English, who go on to have highly successful careers. One of the articles I referenced in my article, it was old, it was about 20 years old, but it talked about a school where English was was clearly very visible, and quite a lot of and I think it was a boys' school, quite a lot of the boys' parents worked in things like the creative arts and media and had studied. So there was a kind of a culture around kind of positivity and viewing English in positive terms. So I think that's probably going to be quite a game changer.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's going to have to be brief from each of you. I'll just go through the list of you again, if that's okay, in order. Thanks, Rachel. That's brilliant. Joe, have you got a silver bullet?
So for me, it's about rethinking the teaching and learning approaches that we're using despite the restrictions. So I know in the chat someone asking questions about how do we do this in a short period of time. I can teach mechanical ways to teach a test quite quickly. It's the other stuff that takes the time. So prioritize the other stuff, prioritize the student voice, prioritize autonomy in text selection. You need to help boys particularly to gravitate to what series now. We need to tap into some of these other things. I've found through my own experience that actually the more complex things that are interesting to boys, they will lean into it and they will have deep, complex conversations about language through something that really interests them, through that core interest in the story, not the mechanical language. I can teach someone a mechanical list of instructions to pass a GCSE exam. I've done it several times. That doesn't take the time. What takes the time is getting the autonomy and the voice. That's what we need to do.
Here. That's brilliant. Thank you, Joe. I'm going to quickly move on to the next person, and that was Helen.
Okay, I've got two suggestions. One is deploy the boys, because the boys who are doing A-level enjoy it. And this was something I found as a head of English. Get them into the classroom, let them answer the questions when you're selling it, because they will say GCSE is really expletive deleted, but A-level's good. We used to get our A-level English language boys to revise some of their language stuff by teaching it to the year 7 and 8. And when it happened that it was the school football captain, it really helped with selling the subject. And the other thing is go hard on the values of English with the parents and with the senior management. And just that sense of, you know, this subject is an unparalleled way of improving your academic, civic, creative, professional skills and your well-being. You know, you're worried about your son's well-being, get him to do this. You're worried about where his job's going to be. These things are still going to be needed in 40 years' time, when AI means that half the STEM stuff they're doing is completely irrelevant. Half the STEM stuff they're doing at the moment will be irrelevant in 10 years. So furnish them with the skills they actually need. So go after the parents, go after senior management, and, you know, push senior management on.
Brilliant. We absolutely know, by the way, of course, that our subject does lead to wonderful careers. You know, we graduates and people who follow English do end up earning money. Just to make sure you all know that anyway. But bodies like University English, I think English Association as well, have got all kinds of resources, and the British Academy has done a study on this as well. So we all know this. We've just got to correct the narrative, haven't we, around vocationality and stuff. Brilliant. Thank you, Helen. Audrey, please, next.
Okay, just quickly, get them to express their opinions, get them to critique the male characters and look at them from a modern perspective. As Joe said, give them their voices back.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's brilliant. And finally, Emma, thank you. Sorry, this has been so quick, but go on.
I think it's the relatability of texts. It's time to kind of reframe how we teach children to read for pleasure, that's aside from just getting them to pass a GCSE. How do they enjoy a book and how do they find themselves in books?
That's amazing. Thank you. It's such a lovely thing to end on a positive note. Thank you so much, all five of you. That's been absolutely brilliant. We have got loads of questions, including there was someone called Mandy Page there who said, please, can we talk about this again? So just to say that some of our people here, I can't exactly remember who's coming to York to the English Shared Futures. I think Emma is actually. I think it's Helen and Rachel, isn't it? Is that right? On the panel with me? So we're doing this again at the English Shared Futures Conference in York, but obviously that's an expensive thing to get to and all that. But yeah, I'm sure it sounds like there's an appetite to really tackle this and carry on with our conversations. I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to come to the questions in the chat, but please read our special issue of the newsletter. And yeah, we're all contactable variously, aren't we, through that? Please, yeah, let's keep it going. It's been really fantastic. I don't really know how to wrap it up other than to say that I feel really, really much better about the future of our subject, having encountered all of you now and having read your essays in that newsletter. So all power to all of you. And thank you so much, Elizabeth, for looking after us as well today.
Okay, so can I just say thank you to all the speakers and to Simon for initiating this whole conversation. And I think absolutely we need another session. Obviously, there's a great need to talk about boys and English. So thank you very much. And could I just invite all of you to check out the events on the English Association website. There are other events coming up, and obviously we'll alert you when there's another Boys in English event in the future. And I'm now just going to stop the recording. Thank you. I think I'm going to stop the recording.